Well, let me first begin by stating it's good to be with you. I've been looking forward for this meeting as I was asked to speak for you. I'm going to give a number of lessons focusing to Christians, but I hope you can bring some friends and neighbors, and I will adjust accordingly. These are going to be practical lessons so that we can make application of those things to our lives. A little experience I was telling as I came up here. Deanna's talked about the difficulty. I've never had to come to Canada with a passport before. Last time I came, you didn't need passports. That was almost 30 years ago. And the first thing I do, I show my passport, and she looked at me and she said, "You have to pull over to the side." So I had to pull over to the side, and then two police officers came to me and they said, "You have to go inside." So I thought, uh-oh, maybe I'm having the same problem Deanna did. And they had me go inside. I had to tell them that I am preaching a meeting of a series of lessons for a week, and he stared at me, and I showed him the outline, and they let me in. So I'm glad of that. If you do get a letter from the government, that's just because I gave your address, so if I do anything wrong, you're responsible. But it is good being in Canada. As we go on the next lesson, the title is going to be It's My Life. This evening, we're going to talk about a lesson I've titled The Habit of 15. I'm going to just go a few days ahead of time. So tonight, The Habit of 15. That's, I guess you meet at 6:30 here tonight is what it's going to be. And then tomorrow night, we're going to talk about Don't Forget as we focus upon our Creator, God. But this morning, for a short period of time, I want to begin with a portion of a poem that my son wrote some time ago. He'd be upset that I've mentioned his name. But within that poem he had, "I am excellent at hurting feelings, making people cry, and offending all that come into contact with me. I'm boastful, arrogant, loud, and have an answer for everything. When I'm not controlled, I have the ability to ruin everybody's life." Of course, who am I? And that's our tongue. Our ability to speak to one another. It can be a very wonderful thing, but so often is the case, it's not wonderful because we don't pay attention to God's guidelines on the tongue. Let's turn to James chapter 3. We've got a lot of passages to go over this morning. In James chapter 3, large section concerning the tongue, we have recorded for us, and I'm just going to read a few of those verses. I'm going to look at verses 5 and 6 in James chapter 3. There we have recorded for us, "Even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles." Notice it goes on to state, "The tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell." Now as he goes on and talks about the tongue, dropping down to verse 8, we have this recorded for us. "But no man can tame the tongue." Now I want to stop here. What does that mean, but no man can tame the tongue? Does it mean since you can't tame the tongue, you can say whatever you want? That's the attitude people have taken today. That just say however you feel. Or is it teaching no man can tame the tongue, that regardless of how long you've been in the body of Christ, you can never become so confident that you've tamed your tongue, because if you do so, that's when you're going to misuse it. And I take it the latter way, that no matter if you've been in Christ for 1 year or 10 years or 30 years, no man can tame the tongue. In other words, you can't take it at ease. You've always got to be cautious that you don't misuse your tongue. And when I look at church problems, sometimes church problems are doctrinal problems, but more often than not, they're not doctrinal problems, they're tongue problems. And we're going to talk about some of the tongue problems. Now you say, well, we're a small group. It doesn't matter what size group. The tongue can be a problem. Even more so today with all the modern conveniences we have as Twitter and Facebook and all the other things such as that, as to where you're not verbally speaking, but in essence you're speaking by putting it in those things concerning different individuals. So we have to watch out with regards to our tongues, that it cannot be tamed. Therefore, we must always watch the regulations. Back in James chapter 1 and verse 26, we have recorded for us there, God teaching us how important this is. "If anyone among you seems that he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless." So again, it's a very important point that we control our tongues. And what we're going to do this morning for the short time that we're here on this portion of our studies is we're going to look at some misuses of the tongue that I'm sure many of us have been involved in at one time or another. That's not to make us upset, but to remind us that we cannot tame the tongue, so we have to be on guard at all times. Another passage before we move on, let's go to Proverbs chapter 13. In Proverbs chapter 13, while you're turning to Proverbs, I'm reminded years ago on an individual I worked with who couldn't speak. And I learned how valuable speaking was because he would become so frustrated. This was when I worked at UPS. He would become so frustrated to try to share something with me that he couldn't share because he couldn't speak like you and I do. But then I kind of envied him because not being able to speak, he didn't get himself in a lot of trouble in a lot of ways like we do because we speak inappropriately. We don't control God's pattern for the tongue. When we think about Christianity, of course, we've got the doctrine of Christ that teaches us how to be saved. We've got the doctrine of Christ that gives us ordinances and a pattern how to worship God acceptably in His way. But the doctrine of Christ also includes how to live our daily lives. And we find in this third passage in Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 3, "He who guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide his lip shall have destruction." Have you ever met someone who's always talking before you quit speaking yourself? And one of the things I've seen as I've gotten older, people are not good listeners because we always want the center stage. We always want to do the speaking. We don't hear what others have to say. And we need to be careful about this. Now, as we talk about the tongue, first thing, did I say that? That's the title if you want to put a title for the lesson. That's the title of my lesson this morning. Did I say that? Now, there's a number of things we could put there. The first thing we're going to talk about is complaining. Now, I don't know how it is in Canada. I would suspect it's no different than America. But we do a lot of complaining. Turn with me, if you will, to the book of Philippians chapter 2. I say we, I'm talking about we who are Christians now. We like to complain about so many different things. We like to complain when we go out to eat about the service that we've had at the restaurant, or perhaps the food that we've had at the restaurant. We like to complain about our taxes. We like to complain about the person down the street. We like to complain that we have nothing to wear. And that's not true because I'm sure you have something in your closet. We like to complain for 100 different reasons. In fact, I will suggest to you, can you go through an entire day without complaining? Challenge you to do that. Can you go through one entire day without complaining? It's hard because we're a society that are programmed to complaining. We don't look at the bright side of things. We tend to look at the negative side of things. And I have to watch out myself. Now you say, well, what does this have to do? Well, it has a lot to do because, see, when we fall in that rut, we're no different than everybody else. You know, I'm not minimizing. It's the blood of Christ that puts me in a relationship with God. But a lot of people aren't going to sit down and study about the blood of Christ unless they can see His life in your life. And I'll tell you, if anyone had a right to complain, you'd have to agree with me, it'd be Jesus. Can you show me in the Scriptures where He complained very much? It's not there, is it? But you and I, we have a tendency to complain. My house is not big enough. My income is not great enough. And go on and on. And I'm not suggesting pie in the sky syndrome, but the Bible is suggesting this. In the book of Philippians chapter 2 and verse 14, here we have a very simple thing. Do all things without complaining and disputing. A real quick lesson on that. Years ago when I was in Florida, we were building a new church building. One of the deacons decided to have a work day with putting some piping in outside the building. The trouble is he forgot to tell anybody except me. And I was complaining, and it just so happened I preached on this passage the previous Sunday, and that's the first thing he brought to my mind, was Philippians 2. Do all things without murmurings and disputing. We have to be careful that we do not constantly complain. Again, turn with me, if you will, to 1 Peter chapter 4. In 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 9. Now, I want to preface this by stating this. This has nothing to do with the hospitality of Verna today. I did not hear her complaining. And I know there's going to be a number of people that have been invited to her home, and that's very hospitable for them to house a preacher for a week. It puts a big mess in their situation. And I didn't hear them complaining. But have you known of occasions where sometimes we do things, and when we talk about grumbling, it's not that we're going to grind. I haven't seen it privately, but we don't grumble in front of the individual. We grumble behind the scenes. And guess who sees that? Our spouse, if we're married. If we have kids, our kids. And inevitably others get to see that too. And I believe that's what Peter's talking about. When we look at 1 Peter chapter 4, it goes on to state in as we look at this passage, verse 9, be hospitable one to another without grumbling. Now, I believe that you had the hospitality, but behind the scenes they were grumbling about it. Now, again, I'm not saying anything about today, but do things like that happen? And, of course, I need to be sure that it doesn't happen in my life. You need to be sure it doesn't happen in your life. One of the things I don't like is a reciprocal thing that, well, we had you over, now it's your turn to have me over. I don't like that. I don't play that kind of game. Because then I get the feeling, are they having me over simply because I've had them over, so they'd really rather not have me over, but they're having me over anyhow because, they got to make that check. Or we were at your house the last time, so you have to come to our house. No, I don't have to come to your house if you don't want me there. If you want me there, that's fine. I'd enjoy coming to your house. But I'm not going to come there just because we think it's a reciprocal thing. Those of us that have families, we know how that works, don't we? For holidays, well, you were here last year, you're here this year. It just becomes a nonsense thing. It really does. As Christians, we've got to learn to quit complaining, but let's move on. Did I say that? Because there's other areas that we need to be extremely careful of, and let me illustrate anger. Anger. Oftentimes we misuse our tongues when we get angry. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. While you're turning to 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 20, let me suggest this. All of us, to some degree, deal with anger. If you're going to tell me you never get angry, we're going to touch you on the next one coming down the line. And that's talking about lying. All of us, now we might have different levels where we get angry. Some of us might be more tolerant than others. But there's not a person I've met who doesn't have to deal with the issue of anger. Now, anger can be justifiable. But even when it's justifiable, I've got to watch my tongue. That doesn't give me the right to spew out things that are not right, even though I have a justifiable reason to be angry. I believe if you go back to the Old Testament, a number of times Moses was justifiably angered at the children of Israel. But he didn't have a right to abuse his tongue. And when he said, well, must we fetch you water, you rebels, we know what happened there, don't we? Psalms 106. So again, I can see him being exasperated with the people, but he had to watch his tongue. Here's what I use. I know Brian gets tired of hearing this. I don't know. He thinks I'm going to pay his trip back to Illinois to hear, but I'm not. Every time you get angry, I want you to remember one letter, D. If you put the letter D in front of anger, what do you get? Danger. Whether it's justifiable or not, every time you get angry, you're in danger of not doing that which is right. Now, let's look at a few passages. As we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 20, speaking about Christians there, for I fear lest when I come I shall not find you such as I wish, that I be found by you such as I do not wish, lest there be contentions, jealousies, and look at the next, outbursts of wrath. I know a number of years ago people were saying you should just speak how you feel. No, you shouldn't. You should keep some of your feelings to yourself. Because if you always speak how you feel, you're probably going to have danger as to what you say. How many times have you wanted to say something and for some unknown reason you didn't say it, and later on you're grateful that you didn't say it? Because you would have had to go back and retract something. And someone said, well, yeah, I can always retract my words. Well, yes, you can always retract your words, but you don't always take away all the consequences of those words. I don't care whether it be husband and wife, parent and child, brother and sister in Christ, brother and sister physically. We have to watch out for it. That's why God, think of all the passages that are dealing with the tongue in the Bible. Proverbs 29 and verse 20. Let's go there. In Proverbs chapter 29. We have recorded for us there, the writer states this, very simple little passage here. Do you see a man hasty in his words? There's more hope for a fool than for him. You ever see someone quick to speak when they get angry? You know, we see this in athletic events quite often. Someone gets angered and they're quick to speak. And kids see that and they kind of want to emulate what they've seen others do. And that's sad. Because if you've ever noticed, when someone gets angry and is hasty to speak, they usually say something that's not right. One of the things I've learned as I've discussed with those leaders of religious error is if they get angry, it's very simple, because their mind is no longer focusing what it should. Now, if I get angry, now that's my problem, because passages that would be right down my mind are no longer there, because I'm so exasperated that my mind's just gone blank, and now it becomes a personal issue instead of a doctrinal issue. And it needs to stay with doctrine. So you see, that's what anger does. Anger distorts your thinking if you're not careful. The Bible teaches that. We need to go to Psalms 39 and verse 1. In Psalms 39 and verse 1. Here we have recorded a passage that's very important. And I love this one, especially when someone's not making me too happy. Before I read this, my mom just moved in with us, and I'm dealing with Medicare. In America, we deal with Medicare as your senior, and trying to deal with that organization is just horrendous. And I have to remind myself of this passage quite often, and that is, I will guard my ways lest I sin with my tongue. The last part is what I like the best. Look at the New King James Version. It says, I will restrain my mouth with a muzzle. You ever see a dog with a muzzle? In other words, when there's someone that's making me angered, when it doesn't, now I know it says, well, the wicked are before me, but if there's a person that's touching the exact buttons that is making me angry, I'm reminded myself of just big old muzzle coming across Chuck's face, so that I don't say the things that I might say that I may later regret that I had said. For instance, not bad because everybody was polite to me, but supposing I got pulled over the side and I started to kid with some of those police officers. Guess where I wouldn't be today? I wouldn't be in Canada. I could say it was just a joke, right? I know they asked if I had various types of weapons. They asked, and I said, no. What if I said, well, just a few? How would have that gone? Not too well, would it? You try to do something like that in an airport. Say you've got a bomb in your bag, and guess what? You'll be escorted, right? You don't do that. And if someone makes you angry and you say something dumb like that, you see the consequences. So again, think of husbands and wives. How many times would it be just left to have something unsaid? Because you see, when somebody makes me mad, it's easy to retaliate. That I'm going to make them even worse than what I am. And that's not taken for anybody's age. So again, very good common sense. I want to go to one more passage in Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 3. In Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 3. Now, why does God have all this in here? Just kind of to fill up a book, or is it lessons that we should learn so that we can apply to our lives? How many times have you laid in bed at night wishing you hadn't said something? Well, the key thing is, learn from that. So the next time, you're not laying in bed that night wishing you hadn't said something. I'd much rather go to bed at night, I need to tell them this because I forgot to say this, than to go to bed at night, oh man, I really put my foot in my mouth. I wished I hadn't said that. And I'm sure we've all experienced that at one time or another. And Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 3. I love this passage. It's honorable for a man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel. Think about it. Anybody can start a quarrel. Somebody, I remember teaching a Bible class years ago, and one man in the audience said, well, I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate. I said, the devil needs no advocates. He's got enough as it is. If you got a legitimate question in class, please bring it up. But if it's not a legitimate question, we don't need no devil's advocates. He's got enough help. So some people just kind of like to stir the pot, and God calls that person a fool. The individual who just tries to keep things quarrelsome, he's a fool, or she, whatever the case might be. Well, perhaps the first two didn't affect you too much. Let me tell you something that affects the church. Very much so. Gossip. Gossip. God's people have never learned to be quiet, and they start gossiping. You ever hear people say, turn to Proverbs chapter 16, I shouldn't be telling you this? First of all, that's a dumb statement, isn't it? You know what I tell, when someone, if you were happen to tell me this week, I shouldn't be telling you this, here's my answer to you. Don't tell me. So if anyone ever comes up to you and they say, I shouldn't be telling you this, they've already given you a way out. Don't tell me. It's pretty simple, right? But see, we're not like that because we as human beings like what? Gossip. And then the way they say it, they've kind of left the impression, well, you're so close to me, I'm going to tell you something that I really shouldn't be saying that. Oh, you see how we kind of deceive ourselves and puff ourselves up? And then we hear something about someone, and we accept it as truth because of the source we got it from, but perhaps it's not the truth. We really don't know. That's how gossip gets started, isn't it? Brian and Deanna's mom loves to hug. She'll see me and she'll hug me. And she'll kiss me. And I'm not that outward emotional type of guy, but that's how she is. Now, I've given this illustration at the congregation where I preach. Now, recently she's been coming so they know her, but for years they didn't know her. Supposing I was at a local restaurant, and there's Donna, and she's leaving before me. I know what she's going to do. She's going to come around to my side of the table, embrace me tightly, give me a hug and a kiss, and maybe there's some brethren sitting 5 benches away. What do? Well, if you got a problem, you come talk to me. You see, a woman who you know is not my wife, and Donna and my wife Susan do not look nothing alike physically wise. Well, if you've got a problem with that, you come to me. Brethren, what's usually done? They call somebody. I don't want to start rumors. Oh, that's another one. That's exactly what you're doing. I don't want to start rumors, but I saw Chuck being kissed by a woman. I've never seen this woman, and publicly in a restaurant. Well, had they come to me, now this hasn't happened, but had they come to me, I would have explained to them. Isn't that how a lot of gossip gets started? Gets started with something that appears to be something that it's not. Or it gets started with half-truths. And things. Now, gossip is a very detrimental thing because it affects a reputation. And think about in the Lord's body, how many reputations have been affected. Oh, did you hear what Brother Stewart preaches? And wow. And it might be a half-truth, right? You don't know that. We have to watch out for that. I had to deal with that years ago. Some brother in a different congregation in Minnesota said something about both myself and another preacher, which was not the truth. He said it in the pulpit. And lo and behold, they knew me, and it got out to us. And it took us 3 months to resolve what 15 seconds he said in the pulpit. And I don't know if we ever totally resolved it. You know, people say you did, but you never know if you did. What a sad situation. And this happens, I hate to say it, brethren, it happens all the time amongst Christians. Shame on us. Shame on us. Small or big, I don't care what size of group, shame on us. We're here to help one another to do that which is right. In Proverbs 16, 27 and 28, we have recorded here, and the word Proverbs 16, in verse 27, an ungodly man digs up evil, and it's on his lips like burning fire. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisper separates the best of friends. Why is it, if you had the choice of hearing about a person who had something good about them and hearing something bad about them, what would people most often choose? They choose the bad, wouldn't they? Had a friend in Florida, great football player in high school, caught many, many, many touchdowns. But you know what the gossip going around, even as he's out of school for many years, is the pass he dropped and why he dropped it in a playoff game. And instead of talking, you see, why do we focus to the bad? Maybe because our society is programmed that way. But we as Christians are programmed differently. We've got to watch out for God. So what happens if someone comes and tells you? It's kind of like the lady who told me in Florida one time, just move there, Spring Warrior, wonderful congregation. Brother Kozens, so glad you moved here, but I wanted you to know that there's this one member here who's not scripturally married. I mean, I hadn't been there 2 weeks. Now, they had elders there, so I don't know why she's coming to me. Tell the elders that. That's what they're there for. Here's my response to her. I said, well, that's a serious charge you gave. I said, well, why don't you and I go and we'll talk to this woman? Oh, no, I don't want to go with you. This is not a make-up story. This actually happened. I said, well, here's what I'll do. Why don't I go tell the elders? Oh, I don't want to get the elders involved. Well, that's sad because they're the overseers of the church. Well, my third choice. Why don't I go talk to this woman? But if I do, I'm not going to tell her someone told me. Don't ever come to me with someone. That someone always has a name. I'm going to go to that person and I'm going to give them your name. That you told me that they are not scripturally married. No, don't do that. Then I said, don't you ever tell anybody that she's not scripturally married. If she's not scripturally married, the brotherly thing to do is what? To go deal with it. But not go tell someone else and leave little seeds of doubt in people's minds. Now, what is Scripture? Well, one man, one woman, one life, one exception. Now, I'm not giving a lesson on that right now, but that's what it is. And as far as I know, that woman met those qualifications, but don't someone come to me in the background and say, well, they're not right and they don't know, or they're not willing to stand up. You know, if I'm going to make a charge against somebody, I better be willing to back up that charge. And if you're not willing to back up that charge, it's gossip. It's gossip. Don't play holier than thou to think, I'm just doing a righteous... No, you're not doing it. You're destroying the Lord's body. It's gossip. We've got to watch out for gossip in the family of God. One more illustration of that, and then we'll move on. Proverbs 26 and verse 20. Where there is no wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. Wow. We as Christians need to pay close attention to that. 2 more areas, and then we'll draw it to a close. Sometimes we lie. We're not supposed to lie, but I don't know. Why do people lie? Turn with me, if you will, to Colossians chapter 3. And Colossians chapter 3, in verse 9. We have recorded for us here, do not lie one to another. Okay. I don't know all the extent of the circumstances of why that was written. I've got my own opinions as to why that's written. But it's talking to Christians here. Do not lie to one another. And I'm not trying to play a psychologist, nor do I want to be a psychologist or psychiatrist. But in my opinion, I think sometimes people lie because they're just not happy with who they are. And they puff up the situation. And that's really sad because you know as well as I do, once you tell one lie, you're going to have to tell another lie to protect the first lie. And you can't lie well enough to forget all the lies you've told to protect the lie. Somewhere it's going to come through. For instance, I love sports. I could rave to you how great an athlete I was. Quite frankly, I wasn't that good. Love football. Started on the A team. But I'd be lucky to make a C-rank college had I played football. I just wasn't. I don't have to lie to you and tell you something I was not. I was mostly being yelled at by the coach on the sidelines because I missed my block. Not that I'd made such a great play. Loved baseball. Could feel the ball. I mean, I could catch a ball, but second baseman anywhere you went. That's why I played. Stunk as a hitter. Couldn't hit my way out of a paper bag. I could tell you, man, I was a great baseball player. No, I wasn't. I stunk. Now, I'm not proud, but the thing is, I'm proud with who I am. I'm a Christian. wanted to become a pro announcer since I couldn't play the sports. So I went to broadcasting school. Thought I'd be a DJ, first of all. Spin the platters with less chatter. That was my, come on. I know my sons say, we don't have platters anymore. They did when I was going. Didn't become a DJ. Didn't become a sports announcer. But lo and behold, doing the greatest work I can think I can do. That's preach the gospel. I don't have to compete with other preachers. We're, gospel meetings, we're not here competing. We are who we are. We have a certain standard to follow. Why do people lie? I really don't understand it, because it doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't get you. You need to be grateful that you are a child of God, and you work with what you have. And some have more than others, so they've got more responsibilities than others. And I've got what I have, and you. God forbid we were all the same type of person. Why do people lie? I don't know why they should. They lie about a whole host of things. Why do brethren lie? I don't understand it. Tell me the truth. Simple as that. You know what? When I go see someone because they're not coming to services, if they're generally sick, tell me you're sick. If you're just lazy, flat out tell me I've been lazy. I'd rather that than someone to lie and say, oh, I've been sick. What do you have? Met a man in the store one time. This was in Florida. Didn't come to services. He's at the grocery store. I happened to be there after services. I tracked him down. I had to track. I thought, boy, we don't believe in miracles, but here he is. He's miraculously healed. It's 12 o'clock and he's feeling good. Missed you at services. Made sure he saw me. Put my hand. I sure missed you at services this morning. I won't give you his name. It's not relevant. He sputtered for a while. Yeah, I wasn't feeling. I said, well, it sure looks like you're feeling better now. Hope to see you tonight. Wasn't feeling good. Hogwash. He lied. How do I know he lied? Because he was at the store. If he wasn't feeling good, he wouldn't be at the store. Your head be in the toilet bowl or something. It would be at the store. Don't lie. Be honest to one another. Proverbs 12:22. Proverbs chapter 12. Someone said, well, now, wait a minute, Chuck. Aren't there times you have to kind of lie to do right? No. Well, what about if someone says, how do you like that food I just served you, Chuck? And you didn't like it. Well, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to give myself away. If I really didn't like it, I won't lie and say it's the most horrid tasting thing I've ever taken. Because it may not be the most horrid tasting thing. I haven't lived long enough. Maybe something else be even more horrid than that. But if I don't like it, I will say this. It's different. Now, don't try to make me say it's different this week. I usually like it. But I've learned over the years, it's not worth lying about. Because you know what? Then my conscience bothers me. When I know I told them something that's not true. Now, we don't have to be what's called brutally honest. How do I look? Well, you look like a burst exploded mattress. No, you don't have to be like that. But you don't have to lie. Just tell the truth. And if you don't know what to say, I plead the fifth. Don't have an answer. Because when you lie, you create additional problems for you. One last passage on that. If we talk about lying, Proverbs 12 and verse 22, you should be there at this time. It says, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. What a beautiful thing. Deal truthfully. Last point. This goes without saying, but I'm going to say something anyhow. Profanity. Colossians chapter 3. Do you realize there's a guy in the Chicagoland area that has started a new business based upon profanity? He started a business. He wrote a book called Cuss Control. C-U-S-S, Control. It's a book to curb your cussing. And what has happened is he has been invited to major organizations for these executives on how to cut back on their swearing. He started a business for people who are cussing. Unbelievable. Why didn't I think of something? I could have done good with a business like that. I don't cuss. Would have been real easy to do that. Why'd he have to think about that and get to go to all these Fortune 500 companies? But really, what that shows us is how deplorable our society is. You know, when we hear the name of God, most of the times it's in a cuss way, is it not? They're wanting God to condemn something. And God forbid that I would use God in that way, that I would abuse his name in that way. I don't know how it's like in Canada, but I've decided that they must actually be teaching this word in school. It starts with an F letter. Starts with it. Because that's the only word I hear nowadays. It's in music. It's in everything. People even wear it proudly on their T-shirts. Sad, isn't it? That our society has come down to that. You say, oh, that's just people who are... Everybody swears. False. Doesn't have to be. You don't have to swear. Second of all, in his point on cuss control, he stated this. He says, aside from being disrespectful, foul languages turn discussions into arguments. And it does. When you start using foul language, I saw that happen at a Dunkin' Donut one day. Two older men, had to be in the late 60s, early 70s. They bumped into each other. One was just paid his bill and it was crowded, getting up, and he bumped into the other guy. He did not say, hey, I'm going to give him a forearm because I didn't like that guy behind me. He accidentally bumped into him. I was 4 men behind. The other guy went ballistic. I guess his space was violated. Well, there wasn't much space there. When you got big men eating donuts, you got less space. And I really thought these two men were going to go at it over donuts and coffee. And what started? Profanity. He spewed out a number of profanities to the other, which challenged his manliness because he didn't want to lose his man card. So now he's got to go back and challenge him. And myself and another gentleman, because you know what, I just wanted my coffee and don't want to get out of there. I didn't want to stand around and tell the police what took place. One got by one guy, I got by another guy, and he was escorted out. Simple as that. But what started it? Cussing. Road rage. What starts it? Get cut off, they start doing what? My wife had that. But you'd have to know my wife. She's real. She's very innocent. She cut off a car. We all do dumb things. That's why I'll never put a religious sticker on my bumper, because I don't drive very good, and I don't want people to see that. And she thought the other person was waving at her, and they weren't waving. They were giving her a not so nice finger. But my wife just waved, and my wife smiles and waves nice back at her. But I'll tell you what that's going to do. It's going to alleviate them wanting to, maybe they just don't have the temper and hit her harder. I don't know. But you see, we have to watch out. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 8 we have here recorded for us. Very simple little passage. I don't see why it's so hard. But now let all yourselves put off all these anger, wrath, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. And we can go into euphemisms and such like, but I think you understand that. Just watch what you say. You know, again, we have to watch our attitudes. As we close, 1 Peter 3:10, for who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. You can take that to the bank. You live by that, you're going to have a better life. You don't learn how to control your tongue, trust me, you're going to have a difficult life. And whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles. Proverbs 21, verse 23. So I hope this has been helpful for this class period. I don't know how we close. Do you close with a prayer, or do I just sit down or quit talking, or how do we do that?